In the 41st millennium, there are no second chances, no retirement plans, and no codes of honor beyond the Emperor's will. Yet what happens when a man who has lived and killed by his own unbreakable rules finds himself in a universe where such concepts are relics of a forgotten age? The Imperium was about to discover that some men cannot be unmade by circumstance, only sharpened by it. The underhive of Gallus Prime reeked of promethium exhaust and human desperation. 10 billion souls crammed into rusted spires that clawed toward a sky they would never see, their lives measured in shifts at manufactorums that ground bone and spirit into weapons for wars they couldn't comprehend. It was here, in the shadows beneath the 47th production level, that the impossible occurred. John Wick materialized in an abandoned waste processing chamber, momentum carrying him forward as reality solidified around him. He hit the corroded metal floor and rolled, instinct overriding confusion, his hand already reaching for the Glock at his hip. The weapon was there. The suit was intact, though torn at the shoulder where something, he couldn't remember what, had grazed him. But this wasn't the Continental's sub-basement. The air tasted wrong, chemical and thick. The darkness pressed against his eyes with physical weight, broken only by flickering lumens that cast sickly yellow pools across surfaces covered in grime, and high Gothic script he couldn't read. Machinery groaned somewhere in the distance, a bass rumble that vibrated through the floor. John rose smoothly, eyes adjusting, cataloguing exits and cover positions before his conscious mind fully engaged. 2 doorways. One sealed with a rusted blast door, the other opening onto what looked like a service corridor. No immediate threats, no sounds of pursuit. He checked his weapons, Glock 26, full magazine, backup piece at his ankle, combat knife, 3 spare magazines, not enough for whatever this was, but John Wick had survived worse odds. He moved toward the open corridor, each step silent despite the debris scattered across the floor. The Continental's training had taught him to read environments, to understand the language of spaces designed for violence. This place spoke of industry on a scale that defied comprehension, of human life rendered utterly expendable in service to production quotas that had been maintained for centuries. The corridor stretched ahead, punctuated by alcoves where bundled cables thick as his torso snaked upward through holes cut in the ceiling. He passed what might have been living spaces once, metal cells barely large enough for a person to lie down, now abandoned or possibly filled with corpses too desiccated to smell. John's expression remained neutral, but something cold settled in his chest. He'd seen poverty, seen desperation in the streets of New York, but this was systematic degradation on an architectural level. A sound froze him mid-step. Footsteps, multiple contacts, moving with purpose down an intersecting passage ahead. John slipped into an alcove, pressing against rusted machinery, the Glock held low and ready. He controlled his breathing, slowed his heartbeat through sheer discipline, becoming part of the shadows. 3 figures emerged into the corridor's dim light, and John's tactical assessment stuttered. They wore uniforms, some kind of industrial security or militia, but their equipment was wrong. Laser guns, his mind supplied, though he'd never seen such weapons before. The knowledge simply appeared, as if downloaded directly into his consciousness by whatever force had brought him here. Energy weapons, reliable but low-powered, standard issue for planetary defense forces across the Imperium of Man. The Imperium. The 41st millennium. Humanity's dominion across 1,000,000 worlds, maintained through faith, fear, and the endless grinding of war. John knew these things suddenly and completely, the same way he knew the weapons these men carried, the roughly trillion souls who populated this hive world, the fact that he was impossibly, irreversibly far from home. He remained still as the patrol passed, their conversation in Low Gothic, another language he somehow understood, complaining about extended shifts and reduced rations. They didn't see him. Even in this universe of horrors, John Wick's particular skills translated perfectly. When they were gone, John continued deeper into the underhive. He needed information, resources, and a plan. The knowledge gifted to him by his transition was fragmentary, impressionistic. He understood the broad strokes of this reality, but not his place in it. What he did know was that he was a weapon without a contract, a killer without a continental, in a universe that seemed purpose-built to require both. He found what he was looking for 3 levels down. A black market exchange, the kind that existed in every city's forgotten spaces. Dealers in contraband ration packs, forbidden tech fragments, and information traded beneath flickering lumens, while the Adeptus Arbites looked the other way for the right price. John observed from the darkness, noting the power dynamics, the informal hierarchies, the way violence simmered just beneath every transaction. A commotion drew his attention. 2 enforcers, larger and better armed than the patrol he'd avoided, were shaking down a vendor. The conversation escalated. One enforcer raised his shock maul. The vendor, an old man whose augmetic eyes sparked with damage, raised his hands in surrender. John stepped from the shadows. "That's enough!" His voice cut through the ambient noise, flat and absolute. Both enforcers turned, shock mauls humming to life. They saw a man in a torn black suit, out of place and seemingly unarmed, speaking Low Gothic with an accent that marked him as foreign to Gallus Prime. "You're lost, off-worlder," the first enforcer said, grinning. "Let me show you the way out." He swung the shock maul in a vicious arc. John sidestepped with minimal movement, caught the enforcer's wrist, and redirected the momentum into the second enforcer's jaw. The crack of electricity and bone echoed across the market. Before the first enforcer could react, John had stripped the maul from his grip and driven it into the man's knee. Both enforcers collapsed. The entire market had gone silent. John stood over the fallen men, breathing steady, and met the vendor's wide-eyed stare. "I need information," John said simply. "And you need better protection than this." What John Wick didn't know, couldn't know, was that 3 figures watched from an observation position 4 levels above, their cameleo-line cloaks rendering them invisible to ordinary sight. They had tracked the dimensional anomaly, followed its energy signature to this forgotten corner of the underhive, and observed the impossible man who had appeared from nowhere. Target displays exceptional combat proficiency. one whispered into a vox bead encrypted beyond civilian detection. 0 augmentation detected, pure baseline human skill. The Calidus Temple will want him, another responded. No, the third said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. He moves like a Vindicar. This one belongs to us. In the market below, John Wick began negotiating for information, unaware that the Officio Assassinorum had already claimed him. The vendor's name was Callus, and he knew enough to be terrified of the man who'd saved him. Over reconstituted corpse starch and brackish water that John forced himself to swallow without expression, Callus explained the hierarchy of Gallus Prime, the planetary governor who ruled from the highest spire, the Adeptus Arbites who maintained brutal order, the gang structures that controlled the Underhive's shadow economy, and the unspoken truth that everyone lived at the mercy of forces so vast they couldn't be comprehended. "You're not from here," Callus said, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused on John. "Not from this world. Maybe not from any world in this sector. The way you move, the weapon at your hip, I've never seen its like." John said nothing, but his hand rested near the Glock. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. "It doesn't matter," Callus continued. "You helped me. That means something, even in this hell. What do you need?" "A way up," John said. "Information on who runs this hive, and time to understand where I am." Callus laughed, a bitter sound. "Time is the one thing nobody has in the Underhive. But I can get you maps, access codes to the mid-levels. Beyond that?" He shrugged. "You're on your own. Though if I were you, I'd be more worried about who's already looking for you." John's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "You appeared out of nowhere. The Administratum monitors everything. Population counts, resource allocation, even the number of breaths we take. Someone knows there's an extra body in the hive. And when anomalies appear, the Inquisition sends their dogs." Callus leaned closer, voice dropping. "Or worse, the ones who don't exist. The Emperor's angels of death who walk among us unseen." Before John could respond, every lumen in the market district died simultaneously. Absolute darkness swallowed the Underhive, and in that darkness, John heard it. The whisper of fabric, the controlled breathing of trained killers, the nearly imperceptible displacement of air that marked professional movement. His Glock cleared leather in a fraction of a second. John dropped into a crouch, using the table for cover, his other hand finding Callus and pulling the old man down. In the blackness, John's other senses sharpened. He counted contacts, 3, no, 4, moving in a coordinated pattern that spoke of hundreds of hours of synchronized training. John Wick. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a woman's voice enhanced by some kind of audio distortion. Unregistered asset, dimensional anomaly, classification, Omega level threat potential. "I'm not a threat," John said calmly, tracking the voice's origin point. "I'm just trying to survive. All weapons are threats, until they're aimed properly." A different voice, male, from his right flank. "The question is whether you'll accept direction or require termination." The lumens flickered back to life, and John found himself surrounded. 4 figures stood in the market, their appearance now revealed, sending a ripple of terror through the gathered crowd. They wore body gloves of midnight black, adorned with the skull and dagger sigil of the Officio Assassinorum. Their faces were hidden behind rebreather masks, but their eyes, augmented, predatory, fixed on John with the absolute focus of apex predators. The market emptied in seconds. Even the enforcers John had disabled dragged themselves away, preferring broken bones to whatever was about to happen. Only Callus remained, frozen by fear, until one of the assassins gestured and the old man fled. John stood slowly, hands visible but not raised. The Glock remained in his grip, pointed at the ground. He'd done the mathematics instantly. 4 targets, excellent positioning, probable augmented reflexes and armor. His 17 rounds wouldn't be enough, but he'd learned long ago that survival wasn't always about firepower. It was about making the cost of killing you too high to be worth paying. "You move well," the woman said, stepping forward. She was tall, athletic, with platinum hair pulled back in a severe knot. Her body glove incorporated camellia-line weave that shimmered when she moved. Vindicare Temple assessment protocols indicate you possess combat proficiency equivalent to our initiates. Impossible for an unaugmented baseline human with no training record. "I've had training," John said simply. "Not ours. We've accessed every military database in this sector. You don't exist. No birth record, no genetic profile, no service history. You appeared in the Underhive 73 minutes ago, like a ghost." She tilted her head. "The Officio Assassinorum appreciates ghosts. We create them." "I'm not interested in joining anything," John said, his voice flat. "I want to be left alone." One of the male assassins laughed, a cold sound. "You don't understand. There is no alone in the Imperium. You serve or you die. The fact that you're still breathing means we see value in the former." The woman raised a hand, silencing her companion. "I am Operative Valdane, Vindicare Temple. My team has authorization to recruit exceptional assets by any means necessary. You represent something we've never encountered, pure skill divorced from imperial conditioning. The High Lords want to know if your abilities can be replicated, studied, enhanced." "And if I refuse?" John asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then you become a security risk," Valdane said matter-of-factly. "Uncontrolled variables are eliminated. We'll dissect your corpse for whatever secrets your muscle memory holds, and your genetic material will be archived for future research. Either way, the Imperium benefits." John's finger rested against the Glock's trigger guard. He could see it playing out, the sudden movement, the last rounds burning through the air. His own bullets finding flesh before the return fire cut him down. He'd survived impossible odds before, but this wasn't survival. This was a choice between death now or something worse than death later, unless he played it smarter. "What kind of service?" John asked. Valdane's eyes showed approval. "The Officio Assassinorum maintains 6 temples, each specializing in assassination methodology. Vindicare focuses on long-range precision elimination, Calidus on infiltration and disguise, Eversaw on berserker assault, Culexus on psychic nullification, Venenum on poison, Varnus on information warfare." She paused. "You don't fit any single template, which makes you valuable. Submit to evaluation. Prove your worth." If you meet our standards, you'll be trained, equipped, and deployed against the Imperium's enemies. And if I don't meet your standards, then the evaluation will kill you, and we'll learn from your autopsy." John looked at each assassin in turn, reading their body language, their confidence, their absolute certainty that he had no choice. They were right. He was alone in a universe that didn't want him, surrounded by killers who would end him without hesitation if he refused. But John Wick had spent his entire life turning impossible situations into survivable ones. "I'll do your evaluation," he said, lowering the Glock, "on one condition." Valdane's expression didn't change. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "I am, if you want me functional instead of dead." John met her augmented eyes with his own unenhanced ones. "Whatever you make me do, whoever you point me at, I need to know why. I need the contract details. I don't kill without understanding the target." The assassins exchanged glances, silent communication through encrypted vox beads. Finally, Valdane nodded. "Acceptable. Vindicare operatives receive full target dossiers. We are not mindless weapons." She stepped closer, extending a hand. "Welcome to the Officio Assassinorum, John Wick. The Emperor protects. And now, so will you." John holstered his Glock and shook her hand, sealing a bargain that would reshape both his fate and the Imperium's understanding of what a mortal human could become. The Vindicar Temple Fortress existed in a state of strategic obscurity, its location classified, its architecture designed to defeat augur scans, its very existence denied by official Imperial records. John was transported there in a windowless Valkyrie, wrists bound with suspensor cuffs that hummed with disabling energy, surrounded by Valdane's team who maintained absolute silence throughout the 6-hour flight. When the restraints were removed and John stepped onto the landing platform, he found himself facing a structure that seemed to grow directly from a mountain's granite bones. Towers of dark stone pierced a perpetually overcast sky, their surfaces inscribed with names, thousands upon thousands of names, carved in high Gothic script. The honored dead, John realized. Assassins who had given their lives for the Imperium's survival. "The Temple of the Silent Shot," Valdane said, her voice carrying an unusual reverence. "For 8,000 years, Vindicare operatives have trained here. We are precision. We are patience. We are the bullet that ends wars before they begin." She turned to John, her augmented eyes reflecting the grey light. "You have 3 days to prove you belong among us. Fail, and your name won't be carved on these walls." They led him through corridors of polished obsidian, past armories containing weapons John recognized only from the fragmented knowledge granted by his transition. Exitus rifles with ranges measured in kilometers, shielding technology, ammunition types designed to penetrate specific armor classifications. Servitors, grotesque fusion of human and machine, moved with mechanical precision, maintaining equipment with augmetic hands that had once been human fingers. John's expression remained neutral, but internally he catalogued everything. Exits, security measures, patrol patterns, the subtle hierarchy visible in how lower-ranked operatives deferred to temple masters. The Continental had taught him that every organization had rules, and rules created predictability. Predictability created opportunity. They stopped at a preparation chamber where a tech priest of the Mechanicus, robed, half-mechanical, its face hidden behind a rebreather grill, waited with diagnostic equipment. Valdane gestured to a medical slab. "First evaluation, biological baseline," she said. "We need to understand your physiology before testing your skills." John didn't move. "What are you looking for?" "Augmentation, gene enhancement, chemical conditioning, anything that explains your capabilities." Valdane's tone held genuine curiosity. "You fought like a man with decades of combat experience, yet you bear no scars indicating extensive trauma. Your reaction time suggests neural augmentation, yet our scans detect none. You're an anomaly, John Wick. We dissect anomalies." "I'm human," John said flatly. "Just trained. Then the scans will prove it." John considered resistance, but calculated the odds. If he wanted to survive long enough to find a way home, or at least understand why he was here, he needed to play by their rules until he understood the game. He moved to the slab and lay down. The examination was invasive and thorough. Auspex scanners mapped his nervous system. Gene readers analyzed his DNA for markers of forbidden enhancement. The tech priest murmured in binaric cant. Its mechadendrites probing John's musculature with sensors that felt like frozen needles. Through it all, John maintained the discipline that had carried him through torture before. Compartmentalize the pain, focus on what comes next, survive the moment. After an hour, the tech priest withdrew, its optical implants whirring as it processed data. It turned to Valdane and spoke in clipped low Gothic. "Subject is unmodified baseline human. No augmentation detected. Genetic profile indicates standard Terran heritage. Muscle density and neural pathways suggest extreme conditioning, but achieved through training methodology rather than artificial enhancement. Conclusion: impossible, sustained performance. Yet he performs," Valdane said, studying John with renewed interest. "Which means either our understanding of human limitations is incomplete, or you're lying about your origins." John sat up slowly, meeting her gaze. "I told you, I'm trained. Where I come from, people like me don't need augmentation. We need focus." "Then demonstrate." Valdane led him from the preparation chamber into a vast training complex that seemed to descend into the mountain's heart. Second evaluation, marksmanship. The shooting range stretched 300 meters, its far walls scarred by countless impacts. Target servitors, lobotomized humans converted into mobile practice dummies, stood at varying distances, their dead eyes tracking John's approach. A weapon rack held standard-issue firearms, stub revolvers, auto pistols, lass weapons, and a single Exitus pistol, the Vindicar's signature sidearm. Temple Master Karos stood beside the rack, an older man whose augmented right eye glowed with targeting reticule overlays. Scars covered his face, and his left arm had been replaced below the elbow with an augmetic limb of superior craftsmanship. He radiated lethal competence that made even Valdane defer slightly. "You will engage targets in sequence," Karos said, his voice gravel rough. "Accuracy and speed will be measured. Choose your weapon." John examined the rack, his hands hovering over the Exitus pistol before selecting a standard auto pistol, a bulky, brutal weapon that fired armor-piercing rounds. Similar enough to firearms he knew. He checked the magazine, chambered a round, and adopted a shooter's stance that came from 10,000 hours of range time. "Begin," Karos commanded. John exhaled and fired. The auto pistol's recoil was harsher than his Glock, but his muscle memory adapted instantly. The first servitor's head snapped back, a perfect center mass hit. John transitioned smoothly, his movements economical, each shot placed with surgical precision. Near targets, far targets, moving targets activated by Karos. John engaged them all in a fluid sequence that demonstrated not just accuracy but combat awareness. When the magazine emptied, 11 servitors lay motionless, each killed with a single shot. The range fell silent. Temple acolytes who had gathered to watch the off-worlder's humiliation now stared in disbelief. Karos approached, took the auto-pistol from John's hand, and examined it as if the weapon itself might explain what he'd witnessed. 17 rounds, 11 targets, Karos said slowly. 0 misses. Average engagement time, 0.7 seconds. Transition speed equivalent to our advanced operatives. He looked at John with something approaching respect. "You waste ammunition on certainty rather than trusting single shots, but your fundamentals are flawless. Who trained you?" "People who understood that survival requires perfection," John said. Karos nodded, as if this explanation sufficed. "Third evaluation begins immediately. Follow." They descended deeper into the temple complex, through levels where the architecture became ancient, pre-imperial, walls carved with symbols that predated the Gothic script by millennia. John felt the weight of the mountain pressing down, the air growing colder and thinner. They emerged into a chamber that made his combat instincts scream danger. It was an arena, circular, perhaps 50 meters in diameter. The floor was stained dark with old blood that no amount of cleaning could fully erase. Weapon racks lined the walls, melee implements from a dozen cultures, some recognizable, others alien and wrong. At the arena's center stood a figure in Vindicar body glove, masked, holding a combat blade in each hand. "Close quarters combat evaluation," Valdane announced from an observation gallery above. "Your opponent is Initiate 7, ranked 3rd in his training cohort. He has killed 17 men in sanctioned duels. You will fight until submission, incapacitation, or death." John looked at the initiate, at the blades, at the blood-stained floor. He'd known this was coming. Organizations like the Assassinorum measured worth through violence. Words meant nothing. Only capability mattered. "What are the rules?" John asked. "Survive," Karos said simply. "Everything else is negotiable." The initiate attacked without preamble, blades whispering through the air in a pattern that spoke of years of training. John sidestepped, his empty hands moving with the same precision that had guided his shooting. He'd learned blade work from Russian mobsters, Chinese enforcers, Japanese yakuza. Every culture's particular language of violence. The initiate was fast, augmented reflexes giving him an edge in raw speed. But John had something the Imperium's training couldn't replicate: experience fighting opponents who wanted him dead for reasons more personal than duty. He read the initiate's body language, predicted the pattern, and when the opening appeared, John moved. His hand caught the initiate's wrist, redirected the blade's momentum, and used the assassin's own strength to drive him off balance. John's elbow found the nerve cluster below the ear. The initiate's legs buckled. Before he could recover, John had stripped both blades and held one against the fallen assassin's throat. "Submission," John said quietly. Silence filled the arena. Then from the observation gallery, slow, deliberate applause echoed against stone walls. "Adequate," Karos said, though his tone suggested something far beyond adequacy. "You fight like a man who expects to die, but refuses to fall first. That is Vindicare philosophy distilled to its essence." He descended into the arena, offering John a hand up. "Welcome to Evaluation Phase 2, John Wick. You've earned the right to be trained." John sheathed the blade and accepted the hand, pulling himself up. He'd passed their tests, proven his value in the only language they understood. But as he looked at the temple masters, at Valdane's calculating expression, at the blood-stained floor beneath his feet, John understood the truth. He hadn't been evaluated for recruitment. He'd been evaluated to see if they could break him. And the real test was just beginning. 3 months of training followed, and John Wick learned that the Officio Assassinorum's methods made the Continental's conditioning look merciful by comparison. Days began before dawn, with physical trials designed to push baseline humans to their breaking point. Climbing the temple's exterior faces without gear, swimming through ice water cisterns while holding breath for minutes at a time, navigating obstacle courses in complete darkness while tech priests monitored vitals for any sign of failure. John endured. He'd survived worse, losing Helen, crawling through the catacombs beneath New York with broken ribs, fighting through the desert with Cain's blade in his shoulder. Pain was temporary. Purpose was eternal. And right now, his purpose was understanding this universe well enough to find leverage. The Vindicare philosophy became clearer through immersion. Patience elevated to sacrament, precision worshipped as holy doctrine, distance transformed into sanctuary. Temple masters taught him to disassemble and maintain the Exitus rifle, a weapon so sophisticated it made his beloved Glock look primitive. Each component required ritual preparation, blessed oils applied while reciting litanies to the Omnissiah. John performed the rituals without belief, but with perfect execution. He understood that faith mattered less than results. Karos became his primary instructor, the scarred temple master recognizing something in John that transcended the Imperium's usual recruitment pool. "You don't fight for the Emperor," Karos observed during a long-range accuracy session, watching John put rounds through targets at 1,500 meters. "You fight because it's what you are. That makes you dangerous to your enemies, and potentially dangerous to us." "I follow the contract," John said, adjusting for wind based on range telemetry. "Give me a target with justification, and I'll eliminate them. That's the deal." Vindicare operatives don't require justification, Karos replied. The Imperium provides the target. We provide the death. Questioning orders is heresy. John lowered the rifle, meeting Karos's augmented gaze. Then we have different philosophies. Where I come from, every contract includes why. The target, the reason, the rules. Without that, it's not assassination, it's murder. In the 41st millennium, there is no distinction. There is to me. Karos studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your first deployment will test that principle. Valdane has requested your presence in the briefing chamber. The High Lords have authorized a contract, and Assassin Commander Wick wants to see if your skills translate from training to execution. The briefing chamber occupied the temple's strategic core, its walls covered with hololithic displays showing star systems, planetary governors, and threat assessment matrices. Valdane stood beside a tactical table where a three-dimensional projection rotated slowly. A sprawling industrial complex on a world called Vorinth Secundus. Governor Matthias Koll. Valdane began without preamble. Appointed by the Administratum 70 years ago to oversee Promethium refining operations. For 6 decades, he maintained quotas, paid tithes, and kept his world compliant. She manipulated the holograph, zooming into a palatial structure. 3 months ago, Inquisitor Helbrecht detected signs of chaos corruption in the governor's inner circle. 2 weeks ago, surveillance confirmed Koll himself bears mutation marks consistent with Nurgle's blessing. John studied the compound's layout, guard positions, entry points, security protocols. Why not orbital bombardment? If he's corrupted, why risk an assassination? Vorinth Secundus produces 17% of this sector's Promethium supply, Karos explained, appearing beside the table. Destroying the infrastructure would cripple Imperial Navy operations for years. The governor must be eliminated surgically, his death staged as natural causes to prevent panic among the workforce. A virus bomb would solve the corruption problem but create a logistical catastrophe. So you need him dead quietly, John said. What about his security? Valdane cycled through personnel files. Governor's Guard Regiment, 3,000 strong. PDF garrison in the capital, void shields over the palace. And Koll rarely appears in public since his transformation began. She looked at John. This is a Vindicar-class contract. 1 shot, 1 kill, maximum distance, 0 collateral damage. Temple Master Karos will accompany you as observer. You will demonstrate that your skills function in operational conditions, or you will die trying. John nodded, his mind already running scenarios. When do we leave? Immediately. The infiltration of Vorinth Secundus took a week of careful positioning. John and Karos arrived on a bulk freighter carrying Astra Militarum equipment, slipping past customs inspections through documents forged by the Varnus Temple. They established a hide position in an abandoned Factorum tower overlooking the governor's palace, 1,700 meters from Koll's private balcony where intelligence suggested he took morning air. The hide was cramped, cold, and perfect. Elevated position, clear sightlines, multiple egress routes. John assembled the Exitus rifle with practiced precision, each component clicking into place, while Karos monitored Vox channels for patrol patterns. They waited, surviving on ration bars and recycled water, sleeping in shifts, becoming part of the tower's forgotten architecture. On the third day, Governor Cole emerged onto the balcony. John saw him through the Exitus rifle's advanced scope, a bloated figure in ceremonial robes that couldn't quite hide the wrongness beneath. Cole's flesh had taken on a greenish pallor, and even at this distance, John could see the boils and lesions marking Nurgle's claim. The governor stood alone, face turned toward the rising sun, perhaps remembering what it felt like to be human before corruption devoured him from within. "Target acquired," John said quietly. "Range 1703 meters, wind 3.2 meters per second northwest, humidity 47%, atmospheric pressure optimal." "Confirmed," Karos replied, monitoring through his own scope. "Authorization to engage when ready." John's finger rested on the trigger. The shot was perfect. Angle, distance, environmental conditions all aligned. One squeeze and Governor Cole's corrupted existence would end. The Imperium would install a replacement, the Prometheum would continue flowing, and another threat would be eliminated. But John hesitated. "Problem?" Karos asked, tension entering his voice. "You said his inner circle was corrupted," John said slowly. "That Cole himself bore mutation marks. But not how he became corrupted, not why. Irrelevant. He serves chaos now. That's sufficient justification." "It's not." John kept his scope trained on Cole, but didn't fire. "If his inner circle corrupted him, they're still alive in that palace. Killing Cole doesn't solve the problem, it just warns them we're hunting. They'll go underground, and the corruption spreads." Karos's augmented eye whirred, refocusing. "You're questioning the contract parameters." "I'm questioning whether we're being aimed at the right target." John's voice remained calm, professional. "Where I come from, you don't just kill the name on the contract. You understand the whole situation, or you end up starting wars instead of ending them." For a long moment, Karos said nothing. Then, surprisingly, the Temple Master lowered his scope. "What do you propose?" "Give me the dossiers on Cole's inner circle. Let me read the Inquisitor's full report, not just the summary. If Cole was corrupted deliberately, there's a source. We find the source. We eliminate it completely. One shot can kill a man. But to kill a conspiracy requires understanding it first." Karos studied John with his unsettling mechanical eye, decades of Vindicar doctrine warring with the logic of John's argument. Finally, he reached for his Vox bead. "Karos to Temple, requesting intelligence package expansion. Operative Wick requires full context before engagement." Valdane's voice crackled through encrypted channels. "Explain deviation from protocol. Operative has identified potential strategic oversight. Request approved or denied." A pause stretched long enough that John wondered if he'd just signed his own execution order. Then, "Approved. Uploading complete dossier now. But Wick, this is your one chance to prove your methodology has merit. If you're wrong, Governor Cole escapes, and you don't." John's finger left the trigger. "Understood." The complete dossier painted a far darker picture than the summary had suggested. Governor Cole hadn't embraced chaos willingly. He'd been infected during a visit to his primary advisor, Chamberlain Vex Mortain, whose estates bordered the toxic waste reservoirs where Nurgle's influence seeped through reality's fabric. Mortain himself had fallen to corruption 5 years earlier, transforming his manor into a breeding ground for plague-bearers while maintaining the appearance of loyal service. More troubling, Mortain had cultivated a network throughout Vorinth Secundus's administration. 17 officials bore early-stage corruption, their mutations hidden by expensive augmetics and cosmetic surgery. If Cole died without this network being exposed, Mortain would simply install another puppet governor and continue his slow conversion of the entire world. "You were right," Karos admitted, studying the data slate's contents. "One shot wouldn't have solved this. It would have accelerated it." John was already planning. "Mortain's manor is here." He pointed to a location on the holomap, 6 kilometers from the capital. Private grounds, minimal security, supposedly hosting a gathering tonight for Vorinth's industrial magnates. Supposedly? According to intercepts, it's a conversion ceremony. Mortain plans to corrupt 12 more officials tonight, expanding his network before anyone realizes Cole's been compromised. John looked at Karos. "We can hit the manor during the ceremony, eliminate Mortain and his core conspirators simultaneously. Cut the head off the entire operation." Karos's expression remained neutral, but John detected approval in the slight nod. "That's not a Vindicare operation. That's assault-grade work. Multiple targets in close quarters, high risk of detection, no guarantee of escape. It's also the only way to actually solve the problem instead of just checking a box on someone's requisition form." John began breaking down the Exitus rifle. "You said I fight like a man who expects to die, but refuses to fall first. Tonight, we prove whether that's enough. Valdane won't authorize this deviation. Then we don't ask for authorization." John met Karos's augmented gaze. "You've been Vindicare for how long? 40 years? 50? Have you ever watched a mission succeed tactically but fail strategically because someone up the chain cared more about procedure than results?" The Temple Master's scarred face twitched, a micro-expression that might have been a smile. "More times than I can count." He stood, reaching for his own weapon harness. "If we do this, we do it properly. Mortain's manor will have defenses the dossier doesn't mention. Demonic guardians, corrupted servitors, possibly plague-bearers manifested from the warp. You've never faced chaos directly, John Wick. It's not like killing men. Men, demons, everything dies if you shoot it enough times in the right places. That confidence will either save us or doom us." Karos activated his Vox bead. "Karos to Temple. Operative Wick and I are conducting expanded reconnaissance. Communications will be intermittent. Maintain orbital insertion window for emergency extraction." They went dark before Valdane could respond. The approach to Mortain's manor required crossing industrial wastelands where decades of toxic runoff had rendered the Earth itself hostile to life. John and Karos moved through the chemical fog like ghosts, their rebreathers filtering air that would have dissolved baseline human lungs in minutes. The manor emerged from the haze like a tumor. Once elegant architecture, now corrupted into something organic and wrong. Its walls breathing, its windows weeping fluids that might have been tears or pus. 23 life signs inside, Karos reported, his Auspex scanner painting thermal signatures through the manor's walls. Concentrated in the central ballroom. Mortain's ceremony has begun. John checked his weapons, Exodus pistol, combat knife, 3 fragmentation charges, and the close-quarters auto pistol he'd grown fond of during training. Not enough firepower for a frontal assault, but John had learned long ago that sufficient violence of action could overcome numerical disadvantages. They breached through the manor's service entrance, moving through corridors whose walls pulsed with unnatural life. Servants, if they could still be called that, wandered past in states of advanced decay, their minds too far gone to register the intruders. John put them down with precise knife work, efficiency outweighing mercy. These people were already dead. He was simply finishing what chaos had started. The ballroom doors stood open, and what John saw inside tested even his hardened sensibilities. Chamberlain Mortain stood at the room's center, his body so thoroughly corrupted he barely resembled humanity. Bloated flesh, tentacles writhing from his back, a face whose features had melted into something capable of expressing only diseased ecstasy. Around him, Vorinth's industrial elite knelt in supplication while robed cultists chanted in languages that hurt to hear. At the ceremony's focus, a warp rift was opening, a tear in reality through which something vast and pestilent was trying to push through. Throne? Karos breathed. Mortain's not just corrupting officials, he's attempting demonic summoning. If that thing manifests fully, Vorinth Secundus is lost. John had seen many impossible things in his life, but watching reality itself split open to accommodate something from literal hell exceeded all previous experience. Yet even as existential dread threatened to paralyze him, John's combat instincts provided clarity. He'd been hired to stop a threat, and philosophical concerns about the nature of evil could wait until after the shooting stopped. "I'll take Mortain," John said. "You handle the rift. Can you close it?" "Vindicare training includes anti-psyker protocols. I have null grenades that might disrupt the summoning." Karos drew the specialized ordnance. But Mortain won't go down easily. His corruption makes him resistant to conventional weapons. "Then I'll shoot him with unconventional ones." They entered the ballroom at a dead run, silence abandoned in favor of overwhelming aggression. John's Exodus pistol barked 3 times, each round a masterwork of mechanicus engineering that punched through corrupted flesh like paper. Mortain staggered but didn't fall, his body regenerating around the wounds with obscene speed. The cultists turned, surprise giving way to fanatical rage. Karos hurled his null grenades at the warp rift, the specialized charges detonating with pulses of psychic nullification that made the air itself scream. The rift flickered, its edges collapsing inward. But the thing on the other side, a great unclean one, a greater demon of Nurgle, pushed harder against the weakening barrier. John moved through the cultists like violence incarnate, each shot placed with surgical precision, each movement economical and lethal. These weren't trained soldiers, they were bureaucrats playing a dark worship, their faith stronger than their combat skills. But there were many of them, and Mortain himself was lumbering forward. Tentacles whipping through space, John had occupied a heartbeat before. "You dare?" Mortain's voice bubbled with fluid and madness. "You dare interfere with Nurgle's blessing? Grandfather will—" John shot him through the mouth, interrupting the monologue. Mortain's head snapped back, and for a moment, John thought it was over. Then the Chamberlain laughed, the wound already closing, new teeth growing from corrupt gums. "Conventional weapons," John said to himself, then adapted. He holstered the pistol and grabbed a fallen cultist's ceremonial knife, its blade corroded green with chaos corruption. If Mortain was sustained by Nurgle's power, perhaps the same power could be turned against him. John closed the distance, dodging tentacles through a footwork the Continental's finest would have envied, and drove the corrupted blade into Mortain's chest. The Chamberlain screamed, a sound of genuine agony, as his own patron's power turned inward, corruption feeding on corruption in a spiral of self-destruction. Behind him, Karos was fighting the demon's manifestation, his Exitus rifle firing specialized rounds into the weakening rift. Each shot disrupted warp energies, fraying the connection between realms. The great unclean one roared, its massive fist pushing through reality, reaching for Karos with claws that promised disease and death. John pulled a fragmentation charge from his harness, armed it, and threw it directly into the rift. The explosion occurred in 2 dimensions simultaneously, material and immaterial, and the resulting psychic shockwave slammed through the ballroom like a tsunami. The rift collapsed. With a sound like reality weeping, the demon's scream of frustration echoing across impossible distances. Mortain collapsed, his body finally succumbing to corruption consuming itself. The surviving cultists fled, their faith shattered by witnessing their patron's power turned against them. Silence fell over the ballroom, broken only by the hiss of dissipating warp energies and Karos's labored breathing. The Temple Master lowered his rifle, surveying the carnage with his augmented eye. "That," he said slowly, "was the most unorthodox Vindicare operation I've ever participated in." John wiped the corrupted blade clean on Mortain's robes and dropped it. But it worked. Mortain's dead, his conspiracy exposed, and the demons banished. Mission accomplished. Yes, Karos activated his Vox bead. Karos to Temple. Targets neutralized, requesting immediate extraction and inquisitorial cleanup teams for demonic contamination. Mortain's entire network is exposed and ready for purging. Valdane's voice came through, cold and precise. Acknowledged. Extraction inbound. Operative Wick, you will explain this deviation from approved parameters upon return. John looked at the bodies, the closed rift, the evidence of corruption that would now be eradicated completely. Looking forward to it, the extraction came at dawn. A Thunderhawk gunship descending through Vorinth Secundus's chemical haze, like an angel of judgment. John and Karos boarded in silence, the Temple Master's expression unreadable behind his rebreather, as inquisitorial teams swarmed Mortain's manor below. Flamethrowers scoured corruption from stone, and penitent priests chanted purification rites over ground that would take decades to reclaim from chaos's touch. During the flight back to the temple, Valdane's voice crackled through the Vox system. Your actions resulted in complete mission success by objective standards. Governor Cole has been quietly terminated by local assets while attention focused on Mortain's conspiracy. Vorinth Secundus's Promethium production continues uninterrupted, and 17 corrupted officials have been identified for elimination. By every measurable metric, Operative Wick, you exceeded expectations. John waited for the other boot to drop. However, Valdane continued, her tone sharpening. You deviated from approved protocols, operated outside command authority, and engaged in high-risk assault tactics incompatible with Vindicar doctrine. Assassin Commander Wick has summoned you for review. Your status within the Officio Assassinorum will be determined upon arrival. Karos deactivated his Vox speed and turned to John. You understand what this means? Wick doesn't summon operatives for commendations. He summons them when deciding whether they're assets or liabilities. I did the job, John said flatly. I solved the problem completely instead of creating 10 more by following a plan that would have failed. You think like an independent contractor, not an imperial servant. That makes you dangerous. Karos leaned back against the Thunderhawk's bulkhead. But for what it's worth, you were right. If we'd followed standard protocols, Mortan would still be alive, corrupting Vorinth from the shadows. Your instinct to question the parameters saved thousands of lives. Will Wick see it that way? Assassin Commander Wick sees everything through the lens of institutional preservation. The question isn't whether you succeeded, it's whether your methods can be replicated within our structure, or whether you're an anomaly that threatens the system itself. The temple fortress appeared on the horizon, and John felt the weight of judgment descending with them. Assassin Commander Wick occupied chambers deep within the temple's heart, where ancient stone gave way to even older vaults dating back to the dark age of technology. John was escorted alone into a circular room, dominated by a table of black marble, its surface etched with operational data from 8 millennia of sanctioned killings. Wick himself stood with his back turned, studying a hololithic display of the galactic map. 1,000,000 worlds, each one a potential target. He was smaller than John expected, his body compact and efficient beneath robes bearing the Officio Assassinorum's sigil. When he turned, John saw a face that might have been 30 or 300, with eyes that had witnessed more death than most soldiers could imagine. John Wick. Wick's voice was soft, almost gentle. The man from nowhere who appears in our universe and immediately begins rewriting our operational doctrines. Sit. John remained standing. I prefer to hear judgments on my feet. A thin smile touched Wick's lips. Temple Master Karos speaks highly of your competence. Operative Valdane believes you possess skills worth preserving despite your insubordination. The Inquisitor overseeing Vorinth Secundus has personally commended your initiative in exposing Mortan's full conspiracy. He stepped closer. And yet I find myself troubled. Do you know why? Because I don't follow orders blindly. Because you carry loyalty to something beyond the Imperium. Wick gestured to the galactic map. Every operative in this temple has been conditioned from birth, or broken and rebuilt, to serve the Emperor without question. Their loyalty is absolute because they possess nothing else. No family, no past, no identity beyond their function as weapons. His eyes locked onto John's. But you have a past, a code developed in another universe, loyalties we cannot comprehend or control. That makes you unpredictable. It also makes me effective, John countered. Your operatives follow orders perfectly, but they don't think strategically. They execute contracts without questioning whether the target is actually the threat. On Vorinth, that would have been catastrophic. On Vorinth, you succeeded because Temple Master Karos enabled your deviation. In other circumstances, your independent thinking would have resulted in mission failure and your death. Voke returned to the table, tracing fingers across the carved data. The Officio Assassinorum has survived 8,000 years by maintaining absolute discipline. Individual initiative is the first step toward corruption, toward placing personal judgment above the Emperor's will. The Emperor's will, or the Administratum's bureaucracy? John's voice remained level, but his eyes hardened. From what I've seen, half your contracts come from political maneuvering, not genuine threats. You're not eliminating the Imperium's enemies. You're settling scores for administrators who can afford to requisition assassins. The room fell silent. John had crossed a line, spoken a truth that existed in every operative's mind, but never their mouths. Voke's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his gaze. "Careful," Voke said quietly. "You stand in the heart of an organization that has ended billions of lives. Speak such thoughts elsewhere, and you'll be deemed heretical." "Then execute me for heresy," John said. "Or admit that you brought me here because you recognize the same thing I do. Your system is breaking down. You need operatives who can think, adapt, and question bad intelligence before it's too late." Voke studied him for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He laughed. "You possess remarkable audacity for a man facing potential termination." He pulled a data slate from his robes and placed it on the table. "This contains 53 contracts currently pending Vindicar execution. Standard protocol would assign them sequentially, operatives deployed without analysis of interconnection or strategic priority. Review them. Tell me which ones are legitimate threats and which are political maneuvering." John approached the table cautiously, picking up the slate. He scrolled through the contracts, his assassin's instinct cataloging patterns the Administratum had missed or ignored. 3 targets who were actually investigating corruption within their own ranks. 2 who had uncovered evidence of heresy among their accusers. 1 who was being eliminated solely because they'd exceeded production quotas and made a rival look incompetent. "These 7, John said, highlighting the entries. "These are innocents being murdered for political convenience. The rest are legitimate threats. Heretics, traitors, Xeno's collaborators. But these 7 are good people being sacrificed to bad faith." "Correct." Voke took the slate back. "I reached the same conclusion, as did Temple Master Karos, Operative Valdane, and 4 other senior commanders who reviewed the dossiers." He met John's eyes. "We are not blind to the Imperium's failures, John Wick, but we are sworn to serve it regardless. The question becomes, can you accept that sometimes the innocent die to preserve the system that protects billions? No, John said simply. Where I come from, we had a code. Never kill innocents, never violate sanctuary, never break contracts once accepted. If you point me at someone guilty, someone who genuinely threatens lives, I'll eliminate them without hesitation. But if you order me to murder an innocent person to satisfy some bureaucrat's ambition, I'll refuse. And if that refusal results in your execution, then I die with my principles intact. I've done it before. Wick nodded slowly, as if John had confirmed something he'd already suspected. Then we find ourselves at an impasse. The Officio Assassinorum cannot tolerate operatives who pick and choose contracts, but nor can we waste an asset of your caliber. He turned back to the galactic map. There is, however, a third option, which is, we create a new classification for you. Not Vindicare, not any existing temple, something unprecedented. You will operate independently, reviewing contracts for strategic merit before execution. When targets are legitimate, you eliminate them with full institutional support. When targets are innocents being sacrificed to politics, you investigate and expose the true corruption. Wick's voice carried weight beyond mere words. You become our conscience, John Wick, our reminder that assassination serves justice, not convenience. John considered the offer, weighing survival against compromise. And when my investigations uncover corruption within the Officio itself, what happens then? Then you report to me directly, and we purge it together. Wick extended a hand. The Imperium is drowning in its own failures. Perhaps a man from outside our reality can help us remember what we're supposed to be protecting. Do we have an accord? John looked at the offered hand, at the assassin commander whose eyes held both threat and hope, at the opportunity to maintain his code while surviving in this brutal universe. He thought of Helen, of the rules that had governed his life, of the promise that even in darkness, some lines should never be crossed. He shook Wick's hand. We have an accord. 6 months after his arrival in the 41st millennium, John Wick stood in a personal chamber within the Vindicar Temple, cleaning an Exodus rifle that bore his personal modifications. The weapon was a hybrid now, imperial craftsmanship merged with principles from his original universe, creating something that existed nowhere else in the galaxy, much like John himself. His official designation within Officio Assassinorum records was Operative Wick, Unclassified Asset, Special Contracts Division. In practice, he'd become something the Imperium had never possessed, an assassin with a conscience. 17 missions had been completed under his new mandate, 14 legitimate threats eliminated, 3 contracts exposed as political murders, and subsequently traced back to their corrupt sources, who then became his targets instead. The High Lords whispered about him in their councils, some viewing him as a dangerous precedent, others as a necessary innovation. The Inquisition watched with interest, uncertain whether he represented hope or heresy. Temple Master Karos had become something approaching a friend, their partnership proving that even in the Imperium's darkness, mutual respect could exist between killers. John had learned to navigate this universe of horrors, finding familiar patterns beneath the alien cruelty. The Continental's rules translated surprisingly well to the Officio Assassinorum's codes. Both organizations understood that civilization required boundaries, that even professional killers needed principles to separate them from common murderers. He would never see his original world again. Helen's memory remained his anchor, the reminder of who he'd been and who he refused to stop being. The 41st millennium had tried to break him, reshape him into just another imperial weapon. Instead, John Wick had forced the Imperium to accommodate something it had forgotten could exist. An assassin who chose his targets based on justice rather than expedience. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war. But now, at least, some of that war was being directed at those who genuinely deserved it. One shot, one kill, one principle at a time. The Emperor protects. More stories await.